Assalamualaikum, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out to the CAIR Know Your Rights workshop this evening. Given the fact that we were thinking about sketchy weather happening soon, it's nice to see faces here. So, yeah, thanks for that. My name is Lauren. I work at CAIR. I do community outreach and events and that sort of thing. So I'm not an attorney, so know that in advance. And this is Gadir.
I'm Gadir Abbas. I'm a staff attorney for the Council on American Islamic Relations.
And so, by just like a quick little show of hands, how many of you guys are familiar with CAIR in general? Slightly? Mildly? Not? Okay, and everybody has a slight, mild understanding of what CAIR is. Okay, that's cool. So, before we kind of go in, we're going to talk a little bit about the work that CAIR does as well to give you some context.
I'm an attorney at CAIR, and what I really like about my role at CAIR is at their national office is because CAIR has about 30 offices across the country. I get to see how issues in California are related to issues that are coming up in our New York office. And also it does provide a national perspective on the various challenges that the Muslim community is facing. And a lot of the challenges that the Muslim community is facing are really national in scope. They have to do with a lot of policy decisions that definitely started before September 11th, but after September 11th were crystallized and implemented in a way that really was inevitably and has resulted in a disproportionate impact on the Muslim community. In addition to those kind of, the watch lists, the endless travel delays that lots of people face, there have been policy decisions that are really tailored to the Muslim community. So the FBI, unfortunately, has made the decision to build and maintain networks of informants and infiltrators that really are unprecedented. 15,000 is the estimate throughout the Muslim community across the country. At the same time as local law enforcement, such as the NYPD. The NYPD built they call it the demographics unit, and it's a unit dedicated and designed to spy on the Muslim community. And that demographics unit is discriminatory because the reason it exists is to collect and monitor the Muslim community, not because there's a specific crime or some type of suspicion, but because they think that the monitoring of the Muslim community is a necessity in this day and age. And obviously it's not, and it's a very silly thing to do, and we know it's silly because in August 2011, documents were leaked and published by the Associated Press from August 2011, for the next 6 months after that showed what the demographics unit, this Muslim spy division, was doing. And one of the things that they did was they sent an infiltrator, an informant, that was employed by the NYPD on a camping trip that was of Muslim students, 19, 18, 20-year-olds, from a New York City college. And we got to see the notes, actually, that informant took during this camping trip, right, paid by the New York Police Department. The guy took notes about how many times people prayed, what types of conversations they had, what they ate, and then he submitted that was his homework. That was like his assignment as an employee of the New York Police Department, was to submit that. They also did things like, which was very useful for those that are interested in trying Newark's halal cuisine. They actually made a compilation of all of the places in Newark and other cities where one could eat halal food, right? So go to the halal grocery stores, Abdullah's Finest Meats, and they have great cold cuts. You go to this place and they serve halal pepperoni, and so on and so forth. And so they essentially mapped the Muslim community there. And all of that stuff is really alarming. And it's alarming not just because we know that the NYPD did it. It's alarming because we know that other law enforcement agencies are probably doing something similar to what the NYPD did, but we just don't know about it. But all of that is to say that when any type of community is in the position of being the first group whose rights get violated, that community is in a position to establish a legacy of defending the civil rights of all Americans. That community is also in a position to reinvigorate constitutional liberties that have unfortunately been eroded in the past decade. And that's been true. I'm not talking about the Muslim, that's always true, right? So in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, you had the African American community that was leading a fight against efforts to prevent them from voting. And some of the crowning achievements of the civil rights movement, such as the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, that's what gives the right of Muslim men to have beards at their workplace against their employer's wishes. That's what gives Muslim women the right to wear hijab at workplaces. And I don't know, right? I never talked to Martin Luther King when he was with Lyndon Johnson in the White House, watching him sign it. But I'm not sure that Martin Luther King had it in his mind that this will benefit, for 50 years from now, this is going to benefit Muslim men and women. But he did have it in his mind, and and others around him did as well, that what we're doing for liberty and rights will inevitably benefit people beyond the community that is pushing for it. And that's really, oh my God, that's really great. That's a really wonderful and fantastic thing. And it's a challenge for the Muslim community, but it's also a really big opportunity. So let's take, in the US, how many Muslim congressmen or congresswomen of Muslim faith have there ever been? Does anyone know? Okay. There is another guy. Close. It does start with the CAR. Yeah, oh, there we go. Carson. Okay, that's good. Okay, so we have Carson and Ellison. What state is Ellison from? Minnesota. Great. Minnesota has a big Muslim community in general, but in particular, they have a very big Somali community. Excellent. Okay, we got it. So we're done with Ellison. Carson. What's his first name? Andre. Okay. Where is Andre Carson from? No, not Arizona. Not Arizona. One more guess. It's not very far from Minnesota. It rhymes with Blindiana. There we go, Indiana. There you go, good, okay. So there's two, right? There's been two Congress people of Muslim descent that have been elected. Okay, there's one more trivia question and then we'll get back to it. Keith Ellison swore in on a Quran. On whose Quran?
Thomas Jefferson.
We have two answers. You said Lincoln. You said Thomas Jefferson. Those that think Jefferson, raise your hand. Lincoln. It's good. It's a good guess. It is Jefferson. Okay. Yeah. But awesome. Okay, so we got it. So there have been two Congress people of the Muslim faith that have been elected. In South Africa, the Muslim population is pretty comparable in size in terms of in relation to the total population of the country. But in South Africa, Muslims have been their equivalent of the attorney general. Muslims have currently the Muslims have. There's been a Muslim governor of their biggest province. There's a Muslim, the ambassador to the United States right now, Ibrahim Rasool, South Africa's ambassador to the U.S., is Muslim as well. Amazing guy. And Ibrahim Rasool, he talks a lot, and it's very good. He's a very good talker. And he gives lots of talks in the area, and he explains, and his explanation for why there's a difference in the amount of representation that we see in America of Muslims versus the amount of representation that South Africa has of Muslims comes down to a difference in the demonstrated commitments that is part of the Muslim community of South Africa's legacy. So the Muslim community in South Africa fought against apartheid tooth and nail. And that wasn't like an inevitable result of history. That was because in apartheid, people of South Asian descent were treated, they weren't treated like white South Africans, but there was almost like a separate category for them that was better than the blacks in Africa, not as good as the whites, but somewhere in the middle. So there was definitely some tendencies in that community to stay on the sidelines or to not to participate in the struggle against apartheid. But as a community, essentially, the South African Muslim community threw its lot in with Nelson Mandela and those that were struggling against apartheid. And because they struggled against apartheid in South Africa, when apartheid fell, it was very clear to the South African society that the Muslims in South Africa fought for a better South Africa. And that accrued to that gave them a stronger ability to exercise leadership in society because there was more trust that was there that allowed them to kind of do that. In the U.S., a lot of the most famous Supreme Court cases in the past decade, Ashcroft v. Iqbal, Boumediene v. Ashcroft, many of these cases about fundamental decisions about, is America going to be a country that follows the law, or is America going to be a country where the executive can do whatever it wants? A lot of those cases, I think a meaningful and underappreciated way, that's a Muslim name, and that's a Muslim that's fighting that battle. And that's what I think is really, really promising and encouraging to me is that, for instance, it's tough. I'm a lawyer, so I'm always obviously looking at other lawyers, but it's really hard to find a Muslim attorney that's 50, it's 55. They exist, but they're like the endangered dodo bird. There's just not that many of them. There just aren't. But there's a lot of Muslim attorneys in their late 20s, in their early 30s, in their mid 30s. And that's kind of cool. That's pretty cool because it's tough to be able to advocate and to compete in a democracy if you don't have attorneys that are committed to your community or that are coming from your community. If you don't have journalists that are committed to your community, that are coming from your community, if you don't have scientists and all of the other things, all of that stuff is it's really, really important. And the Muslim community is very, very young. We really are. Did you know that the Muslim community is in the United States is it's like a little baby community. And it started with the MSA. The MSA was really the first Muslim organization in the US. And out of the MSA, the Muslim Student Association, like you guys, which started in Indiana and Illinois, FYI, you got ISNA. Out of MSAs, you got Art, Nahad, and Ibrahim, and the people that started CAIR. They were up probably as 19 and 18, 19, 20-year-olds still wearing suits. But Keith Ellison was there at the University of Minnesota with them, and they were all part of the MSA. And so you have the MSA is really the first engine of activism that the Muslim community sets up for itself in the US, and it leads to the creation of these other advocacy organizations that inevitably, and as just kind of a prerequisite, are required to kind of be strategic and keep that type of activism going. But the challenges are really, really steep, and they make me sad sometimes. Can I tell you guys the saddest thing that I've ever heard? Okay. The saddest thing that I've ever heard someone tell me is my mom before I leave for the mosque, my mom always tells me to be careful. That makes me really sad because in the US, and really it's very true, this is totally true, and the US, I think, in my opinion, has the best understanding of religious liberty in the entire world. I'm going to say it. In the entire world, the US is the best understanding of religious liberty. Really, very truly. It was born out of essentially a compact between an unknown amount of diversity within Christianity. That was definitely the first groups, but you didn't find Quakers and Presbyterians and Protestants and Catholics in a single place in such close proximity in Europe or elsewhere at the time. That's what made the US unique, and that's probably where they got this unique conception of religious liberty. But to hear that a house of worship in the US going there concerns a mother makes my blood boil, because, and what makes my blood boil even more is that her concern emanates out of irrational and discriminatory policy choices that law enforcement agencies, both state, local, and at the federal level, have unfortunately made. I got a call one time from an FBI agent, and this happens, where the FBI agent said, I want to talk to some guy. And so the guy did a good job. He exercised his rights. So when you get approached by law enforcement, just as this guy got approached by law enforcement, what he did was he called a lawyer. He said, thank you, let me have your card, and I'll get back to, my lawyer will get back to you. And he didn't have a lawyer at the time. Said, my lawyer will get back to you. And then he gave CAIR a call. And then what we do in that situation is we reach out to the law enforcement. And that's really important. There's almost never a situation where the government can compel you to say anything. Almost never. There's an exception that I'm not going to even bother sharing with you guys because it's very, very rare and it's very specific. So if law enforcement approaches you, your right is to not talk with them, to contact an attorney, and to have an attorney reach out.
What if they asked you to come into your house?
So if they approach you at your house, you don't let them in your house unless they have a valid search warrant. And you do that especially if you have nothing to hide. If you have nothing to hide, that's the best reason not to let them in your house. You have nothing to hide. Don't let them in your house. Don't let them in your house unless they have a valid search warrant. Don't talk to law enforcement by yourself. Call an attorney first. Very important. But okay, but here, let me give you why it might be a good idea.
Don't they always tell the truth though? Aren't they always?
So they don't always. They actually are authorized and they can lie to you. But did you know that it's a crime to lie to federal law enforcement? It's called obstruction of justice. And a lot of times that's where people get in trouble, not because they did something wrong, but because they got put in a pressurized position and they acted out of character and said something that wasn't true. And you want an attorney there to be able to navigate that process. But back to my guy, right? My guy calls me, he's like, call this guy, FBI. And I call him, and one of the first questions we always ask is, well, why do you want to talk to Bill? And this guy, you know why he wanted to talk to Bill? He wanted to talk to Bill because, well, he thought that Muslims in any community, and he was very philosophical about this, in any type of religious community, in any type of Muslim community, wherever, there's going to be conversations that occur inside that Muslim community that I, as an FBI agent, are never going to be privy to. I'm not going to be able to sit there. So because I'm not going to be able to be part of these conversations, I need someone who is, that can tell me what happens. But Senor FBI agent, you didn't tell me why Bill, why not Abdullah, why not Yusuf or Sabrina or what have you. Well, the way he found his name was, it occurred to him, he's like, well, I want to talk to as many Muslims as possible. I want to just get them all, put them in my little knapsack and gather all the information I can out of them. So he figured, it was his assessment, that Muslims that work for a state agency are probably more likely to be willing to talk with the FBI. So this guy, he found a directory of state employees. And he said, I couldn't believe it. I'm going through the state directory of employees and I'm calling all the Muslim sounding names. So that's idiocy. That is a product of a bias that is irrational, counterproductive, and also dangerous, right? A guy who thinks like that, you don't want to be sitting down with this guy by yourself, if at all ever. And so in that situation, we just deny. We say, thanks for the invitation, but no thank you. We're not going to sit down and talk to you. Because ultimately, it's your right to say, no, we're not going to have any conversations with you. And if it happens to be your choice to have a conversation with any member of law enforcement, there's no situation, none at all, where it makes sense to have a conversation with law enforcement without an attorney present, right? So one, perhaps there might be a situation here or there where it makes sense to sit down with law enforcement. That is a possibility. It's definitely the exception, but it happens. But there's never any situation where it makes sense to talk with law enforcement without an attorney present.
What if they pull you over and you don't have an attorney in the car with you?
So if they pull you over, they have to have a reason to pull you over, right? Giving you a ticket, you have a busted light, whatever. And their authority to detain you on the road is limited to the purpose to which they've pulled you over. So if they pulled you over for your taillight and ask you, so who's your imam? What did he give a khutbah about this week? Well, I'm sorry, officer. Those questions I really make me feel uncomfortable, and I'm not comfortable answering those questions. Now, I understand that you pulled me over for speeding. Please, if you could give me my ticket, and I'd like to be on my way. That's important. It's people, and we have a lawsuit about silly questions that get asked of Muslims while traveling at the border. So in Michigan and all across Florida, from flying from an airport, we noticed a few years ago that there were some Muslim travelers, every time they crossed a border, they would get pulled aside for questioning. And for some of those Muslim travelers, not all of them, but for some of them, they got asked essentially the same set of questions each time. And the questions made my blood boil, and perhaps they will make your blood boil. They asked, how often do you pray? Are you Sunni or Shia? Who's your imam? Which mosque do you go to? And this is my favorite question. My favorite question was, do you do the morning prayer at the mosque? Now let's unpack this. So let's take the entire subset of questions the entire subset of questions in my mind attempts to determine the amount of religiosity a person has. Are you a really religious person, or are you just not that religious? Okay? That's a completely inappropriate thing for the government to be doing. But let's go further, right? This is college. We're penetrating thinkers. Why would the government want to determine how religious someone is at the border? Why would someone want to do that? I've thought about this, and the only thing that I can come up with is, in the minds of some unfortunate, misguided government officials, being more Muslim, believing in Islam firmly, is a reason to be suspicious of them. And, oh my God, the people that can wake up at dawn, put on some pants and drive to the mosque to pray, these are people that need to be flagged at the border. Because that type of commitment is alarming to us. And I think that's what they're thinking. I don't know, I haven't gotten to talk to them yet. Inshallah, we will get to depose them in the next couple of months. But that's probably what they're thinking. And that's a terrible, not only so one, it's an unconstitutional thought, right? The Constitution has this thing called the Establishment Clause that says the government has to remain neutral between faiths, that it can't do anything that broadcasts a message of affirmation of one faith. In our country, it typically is like an affirmation of Christianity, 10 Commandments, what do they call those scenes? Nativity scenes. So that's typically where it comes up, an affirmation of one faith. That's not allowed. But what also isn't allowed is a condemnation of one faith. And when you're asking questions as a matter of policy about the religiosity of Muslims, that to me sends a message that something is inherently dangerous about Islam that we need to be worried about. And that makes me very grumpy. But there are other things that are consequences of neutral policies that end up disproportionately affecting Muslims. Has anyone heard of the no-fly list? Does anyone know anybody on the no-fly list? You don't have to tell me who they are, but does anyone know someone personally on the no-fly list? Some head nods. Are we comfortable with hands? Could we do some hands? Who knows someone on the no-fly list? All right, some of us. What? Oh, wait, this is like a 300 level question right here. What happens to people that are on the no-fly list? You cannot fly. Bingo. Awesome. So you can't fly over or through U.S. airspace, which sucks. It's a bad thing to not be able to fly. And it's something that, I take for granted, that I'm going to Michigan next week. I'm going to hopefully wake up in time, drive to the airport and get on a plane and fly to a really cold place, and I will be underprepared for that cold. But I get to fly there, which is great. People that can't fly, they can't attend family funerals. They can't enter certain occupations that require flying. If I was on the no-fly list, I couldn't do my job. I travel a couple times a month for cases, and I couldn't do those things if I was on the no-fly list. Also, yes?
Does no-fly list also include trains and buses that travel?
It does not include trains or buses. There was our good friend from, Charles Schumer from New York, senator, right after, there was, they killed Osama bin Laden, and they raided, and they got files from his house. There was some talk of making a no-ride list for trains, but that didn't go anywhere. However, it does impact your ability to board ships. So it also impacts your ability to enter other countries because the U.S. shares the no-fly list with other countries. So it has impacts on that. For instance, we've gathered from experience that if you're on the no-fly list in the U.S., you're unlikely to be able to enter Kenya. For whatever reason, you just can't. If you're on the no-fly list, you're just not going to be able to enter Kenya. But what happens to people that fly, right? So they go abroad, they visit Uncle Bob in Kuwait, and then after they fly abroad, then they get put on the no-fly list. And this happens regularly. Probably like we get one call a month where it's usually a young Muslim male who's flown abroad for visit family, for Umrah, for whatever it is. And then they fly abroad, no problem, and they try to get on a plane and say, sorry, you're on the no-fly list. I'm not going to tell you why. I'm not going to tell you how you can get off because there's no way to get off the no-fly list. And that's it. Sorry. I wish you the best of luck in returning to the country of your citizenship. So we sue about this, right? We sue about this issue. How can it be that the United States is preventing American citizens from returning to America? America is their citizen. That's their citizenship. They shouldn't be able to do that. And then we actually looked back. Did in the 18th century, did our good friend Thomas Jefferson, did he come up with a no ship list where Americans could not return aboard seafaring vessels to the U.S.? No. In the 19th century, did they do anything like that? No. The only time the United States has ever tried to prevent and restrict an American citizen's movement to the United States is in the past 10 years. It's never, ever happened before. It's super bogus. And so we had to argue in court, say, Your Honor, he's an American citizen. As part of his right to be a citizen, his citizenship right, if it means anything at all, it should mean that he can be inside the United States. Do we have other lawyers? No, we don't. No, all undergrads. Does that sound that sounds pretty good, right? I made it up myself, right? It's pretty good stuff. It's really fundamental, right? If you're a citizen and you want to benefit from your citizenship, well, maybe I need to be in the place where I can benefit from my citizenship. And so the U.S. in their rebuttal, right? So we had a guy, Ghulat Muhammad. He's a Northern Virginia Muslim young guy from this area. He flew to Kuwait, Somalia, Yemen, visit family, study Arabic, and he went to go renew his visitor's visa. He disappeared for 8 days. The family came to us, said, we don't know where Ghulat is. We're worried that someone has taken him. We get a call from him 8 days later. He's in a deportation facility. And he says, I've been tortured. They've asked me questions about stuff in Virginia. It's called bastinado. What they would do is they would, so a lot of these kind of professional torturers, they want to torture, but they don't want to leave a mark. So one of the things that they do is, one of the techniques is they'll hit him on the soles of his feet over and over again, and they'll make him walk around. And they'll just do that over and over again for hours. We'll put him in stress positions until he passes out. All sorts of terrible, despicable things, and I won't get into all of that. Happened for 8 days. And then the Kuwaitis deportation facility officials, they're like different Kuwaitis, right? They're not part of the underground covert torture regime that Kuwait apparently monitors. They seem like pretty reasonable guys. And so instead of support from the embassy FBI agents came and tried to interrogate him. And the Kuwaitis were like, and they were very aggressive about it, and the Kuwaitis kicked them out and said, we want to just go back to America. So they wanted to send him back to the US as quickly as possible. They tried to deport him, but they could not deport him. Does anybody have a guess as to why they couldn't deport him? And we know that people on the no-fly list, they can't fly. So, what? Oh, yes, deal. Got it. That is pretty savvy technology. So, he can't fly, period. And he's just going to live there in the deportation facility forever. And so we sue, and the government just kind of gives up right away. And so he flies back a couple days later. But now what they're saying in court is, we didn't violate Ghulat Mohammed's right to come back to the US because he could have taken a boat. They said that in court. They said it in court. He could have taken a boat. One, that wasn't true because he was in custody. He actually couldn't take a boat. But two, are you serious? I mean, that's a level of argumentation required to rebut something like that. So it has happened. So you could, let's say you could fly to Europe. You could make your way over land to the UK, and then you could take a boat from the UK to New York, and then you could take a train down to DC. And we had, so the right to re-enter the right to return to the US, that's like a citizenship right. The right to fly from the US and leave it, it's still a right, but it's a little bit weaker. It exists from a different part of the Constitution. That's just not as cool as the other part. But we had a guy, Michael Migliore, right? He's dual American-Italian citizen. He converts to Islam in college, had some wayward years, found Islam. Parents were Catholic, but really supportive. They really saw that his conversion had an awesome effect on him. All of a sudden, he was doing great in school. But just a couple years after he converts to Islam, he ends up on the no-fly list, right? Probably, I don't know, probably if he didn't convert to Islam, perhaps things would have gone differently. I don't know. I think so. No, I think that's absolutely the case. But he wants to go visit mom, who's in Italy, tries to board a plane, and he can't because, and we know that people on the no-fly list can't fly. So it's hard to get people back to the US. We're able to do that because the government is just unwilling to, 1 minute, we're going to do this. The government is just unwilling to prevent American citizens. It just looks very bad for them. But for this guy, he said, well, I'm not sure that it's going to, and we told him it's going to take us a while to try to get you to be able to fly from Portland, Oregon to Italy. So he said, you know what? I'm going to take a train from Portland to New York, and then I'll take a cruise ship from New York to the UK, and I'll fly from the UK to Italy, right? Okay, that's fine. So he takes a train from Portland to New York, 3 days. I think it was a 3-day train ride. Okay, he's like 22, 23. Now it's the great part, right? He gets on a cruise ship. God bless America. There's some collateral benefits to being on the no-fly list, it turns out. He's enjoying himself. It's like a 4-day cruise to the UK, taking in the buffets. There's a great musical. Wakes up on the last day and he looks out his little porthole window and he sees a speedboat coming up. It's the last day when he's going to dock, right? So he looks and he's a speedboat. He doesn't think anything of it, right? He's near shore. A couple hours later, 2 British agents knock on his door, take him into custody, and they detain him under the UK's Terrorism Act of 2000. So UK is terrible about, they don't even have a constitution, right? Constitutions are great for protecting the rights of unpopular minorities. That's a good thing that we do here. The UK doesn't have it, so their press freedoms are much weaker, their religious freedoms are much weaker. A lot of things are just not. So they said, under this law, we have the authority to detain you for 10 hours. You don't have the right to remain silent. You have to answer our questions or it's a crime. So they ask him the stupid stuff about what's going on in Oregon, and then they let him go after 9.5 hours, and then they follow him to the airport, and then he flies to Italy. No problem. So we're going to break for Maghrib, but these are terrible things. And they're terrible things not just for Muslims, they're absolutely terrible things for Muslims, but they're terrible things for everybody. Because as we'll learn in the 5 minutes that will follow Maghrib, very brief, a lot of the policies that began by targeting Muslims. Do you guys know who Glenn Greenwald is by any chance? Glenn Greenwald? Right? Sounds familiar. How about Edward Snowden? Edward Snowden. So Edward Snowden went to Glenn Greenwald, and then Glenn Greenwald started publishing the documents and analyzing documents and publishing them. Do you know, can anyone name the other journalist that Edward Snowden went to? It's not the WikiLeaks guy. Her name is Laura Poitras. She's a documentarian. And actually what happened, Edward Snowden, you're right, a very tech-savvy guy, he sent Glenn Greenwald an email and requested Glenn Greenwald to download encryption software so he can decrypt an encrypted email that Edward Snowden wanted to send him. Glenn Greenwald got a little bit busy, he gets busy, so he just didn't do it. And so Edward Snowden tried him a couple times, but then Glenn Greenwald didn't do anything. So Edward Snowden reached out to Laura Poitras, who's Glenn Greenwald's good friend, and said, Laura Poitras, can you unencrypt this email that I'm sending?
And women get things done.
And she did, but she had, and let me tell you, a lot of people now have familiarity with encryption software. We do at CAIR, sometimes we'll do encrypted, secure instant messaging with clients we have overseas. So now people have familiarity with it. Before Snowden, maybe not so much, but she had familiarity with it. You know why she had familiarity with it? Because she was on the same watch list that a lot of Muslims end up on, not the no-fly list, but another list called the selectee list that results in travel delays. Every time she would come back to the US, they would take her aside, download all of her stuff, search through all of her things. So she started to encrypt her computers, her cell phones, so that she wasn't able to do it. But the reason I bring her up is we don't know, and we probably never will know, exactly why they put Laura Poitras on the selectee list, but it probably has a lot to do with her politics. She was really outspoken against the invasion of Iraq, and some people in the government don't like that and take that as reason for suspicion. And if there's already an infrastructure to punish people that the government doesn't like, such as the no-fly list or the selectee list, there's like a mechanism that the government can utilize to punish people that don't commit any crimes and are just unpopular for whatever reason. And Laura Poitras, I think she's Greek, and she's definitely not Muslim, but she was affected by a policy that disproportionately affects Muslims. And that's the nature of things, right? The things that Edward Snowden revealed, the widespread surveillance of all of our phone call records, that started out as a program called the Total Information Awareness Program. And it became public right after September 11th. And people were really alarmed. They literally had the symbol, the logo for the Total Information Awareness Program was a pyramid with like an eyeball on top. And the eyeball had like a ray over the globe. I mean, it's total, they wanted to know everything. And people were very opposed to this. And they said, well, that sounds a little bit too far. So they said, okay, we got it. We'll change the name from Total Information Awareness Program, TIA, to the Terrorist Information Awareness Program as a way of communicating. This isn't about you guys, this is about the Muslims. We gotta watch the Muslims. It's not about, Bill and John. And so these policies that start out disproportionately affecting the Muslim community will inevitably and have spread to others. So it's our job. We can do it, folks. We can push back against these policies and challenge them and make it so that everything is better. Okay, that's
So I was gonna say, that being said, can you give us like a bulleted, here's the things you need to know, like real quick on maybe like the law enforcement, a recap on the law enforcement, a recap on travel.
Yeah, so
bullet points of here's what you need.
The recap on law enforcement is you always have the right to not talk to law enforcement. They only have the right to enter your home if they have a search warrant. If they don't have a search warrant, say no. There's never a reason to let law enforcement inside your home if they don't have a search warrant. And there's also never a reason to meet with law enforcement without an attorney. There's no such thing as a reason to do that. So what do you do if law enforcement contacts you anywhere? Call a lawyer. You can call CAIR. I'm for free. We don't charge, right? You just call an attorney, and then the attorney reaches out on your behalf. I think that's the bottom line. The second bottom line is you should do. It doesn't matter what you do, but we're a small community with lots of capabilities. But the only way we're capable is if people do something. You guys are involved with MSA. That is like a really important thing to do because that's how Muslim activism in the U.S. is generated and start. And you talk to, I think, a lot of people at CAIR. Most people started in the MSAs. So, but do some. It doesn't matter what your profession is. Just do something that makes your community stronger.
What about when you're traveling? We mentioned a lot of things that happen with travel. Is there anything people can do to protect themselves? Things they need to be aware of related to like?
If you're an American citizen, you have the right to come back to your country. And if you find yourself abroad and you can't come back, call us, call me. I'll help. And while you're traveling, if you're crossing back into the U.S. and they stop and ask you questions about how often you pray, whether you're Sunni or Shia, those are questions you don't have to answer and you shouldn't answer. And what you should say is, I think I'm uncomfortable answering those questions. Can I speak to your supervisor? That's a really good idea. And unfortunately, what I think, and if you say that, typically what happens is they just kind of, we'll just get the next Muslim. We do this all day. We ask Muslims questions all day. We'll just ask the next one. But the goal is eventually, maybe all American Muslims will know that it's inappropriate for law enforcement to ask them about their faith and will decline to answer questions about it.
What about electronics?
If you take electronics with you abroad, they have the right, the U.S. has the authority to search through all of them. So even if you encrypt it, so that's if you are actually going to take something abroad, my first advice would be to not take your primary cell phone, your primary laptop with you abroad because they can take the whole thing, all of the information on it. Or let's say you password protect it, and you don't obviously have to give them the password, but they can just take your laptop and say, we'll send it to our forensic team for 2 weeks and then take your information and then send you the laptop back. So some people lose their laptops for a couple of weeks. So don't do it. That would be if you can avoid it. Encryption is real good. It's getting a lot easier and more user-friendly. And so if you have to, I would definitely encrypt what it is that you're taking. Yeah. Cool. That's yeah.
So if I'm studying law or something at Mason, are there some programs that I can get involved with CAIR or some other organizations that can kind of with my interest?
Yeah, so CAIR does internships year-round. We have 4 attorneys in the office working on cases across the country. So absolutely, yeah, definitely encourage you to apply as an undergraduate, and if you go to law school, to apply as a law student.
My quick plug is that I have like a clipboard that's got a sign-up sheet, so if you're interested in volunteering or you're interested in doing something, whether that's like an internship with CAIR, we have a couple options for things to circle. Leave your info, I can get in touch with you. I also have cards as well, and I do like managing interns and getting people in the door through the intake process. So if it's something you're interested in, you have opportunities, contact me.
No.
Okay.
It was close. I wasn't sure. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, if you get interviewed by FBI or a police officer, you choose to speak to them for whatever reason, are you allowed to record that conversation?
So that's a state-by-state determination, right? So some states are one-party consent states, some states are two-party consent, and what that means is in one-party states, if one of the parties to a conversation consents to recording, then it's lawful. In two-party states, if both parties to the conversation have to consent to the recording for it to be lawful. So it's generally, just like as kind of a general matter, it's inadvisable to secretly record conversations with law enforcement. It's not always illegal, like DC is one party consents. I'm not sure what Virginia is, so I won't say. But that's part of the reason why you have an attorney there, right? The FBI doesn't, almost always, as a rule, they meet with two. And the same reason they will do a meeting with two FBI agents is because they have a witness, right? That's precisely the reason, like one of the bajillion reasons why you shouldn't meet alone with an FBI agent. Who's gonna win in a credibility battle? You, Abdullah bin Hassan, or two FBI agents? Two FBI agents, obviously. I'm sorry. So yeah, you want to have a lawyer present. You don't want to be in that position at all. Don't meet with law enforcement by yourself. And a professional FBI agent will appreciate, or law enforcement will appreciate that and respect that. An unprofessional law enforcement agent or FBI agent will say, well, I don't understand why you have to make it this whole big deal. If you just had nothing to hide, why wouldn't you just talk to me? Well, no, that's not actually, that doesn't make sense. If I have nothing to hide, that's like that's extra reason for me not to talk with you, because there's nothing really to talk about. So why is the onus isn't on you to demonstrate why it doesn't make sense to talk. The onus is on them. They want to talk. You didn't start this whole process. They did. So they have to give you a reason, and you want to have an attorney there that can kind of navigate whether that reason makes sense. Other questions, thoughts? Yes.
Might go into like a whole other subject, but I know from being in local messages and speaking with people there, there's like a fear that someone's always listening
Yes.
to you. Like, and if you ever see a new face in the mission, you don't know if they're really Muslims or like, does that happen often?
So that's a sentiment that exists in masajids across the country. For instance, I think it was the Hunter MSA, one of the responses to this, and with this revelation that NYPD had this spying program that was built to spy on the mosques, was they put up, and they like their little space, they had a masala, and they put up a sign that said, I'm paraphrasing, don't talk about politics in the masala. If you want to know why, see here. And then they printed out a copy of the article about the spying, and then they stapled it to the poster. That's a tragedy. I mean, that really, out of things that make me sad, that's like number 2 or number 3. And it is the case that, there is this, the FBI has created this network of informants and infiltrators that saturate the community across the country. Does maintain that type of network. And it's really sad that it has caused some reticence to engaging with outsiders. But you don't, like, that's, if someone is new that's coming to the mosque, it's your first thought shouldn't be, and really, practically speaking, can't be there to spy on you. And in California, for instance, the FBI hired a former, like a convicted felon in an operation they called Operation Flex. And they said, we want you to go to the mosques in Southern California and talk about jihad, talk about blowing stuff up, and we'll see if anybody bites. And so he went around saying despicable, terrible things that people at mosques actually don't talk about. And one of the mosques, they reported this guy to the FBI. They reported the FBI's informant to the FBI, and the FBI didn't do anything. And so we learned about this because this ex-felon was charged with other crimes, And he thought that part of his agreement with the FBI was the dismissal of these charges. And that there was some payments that he said he was supposed to receive that he didn't receive. So the only reason we know about this is because this screwball informant, ex-convict weightlifter, he was a weightlifter, he had like a contractual dispute with the FBI, and he was really upset that he didn't get paid for spying on it. And we learned about all this stuff, and he would leave recording devices at the mosque, and he actually he talked with there was this one, I can't remember if it was a transcript or a summary of a conversation that he had with the FBI where he was talking about, well, should I try to sleep with women in the community to kind of use it against them? And I was like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. You should try to go ahead and do that. I mean, that's, just like, it's not, right? So we're not talking about reasonable men and women that are doing these things. We're talking about folks that are misguided, either out of ignorance or malevolence, and are doing things that are counterproductive, a waste of money, and illegal.
But they can legally record.
So recordings are tricky, like I said. So one party and two party consent states the rules are different. It's difficult. It's often illegal for people to place recording devices where they're not. It's not always, but it can be. So that's part of CAIR has a lawsuit about that, and part of the lawsuit relates to he would leave a gym bag in the musalla that had a recording device, and then he would leave the room, and so that recording device would stay there, and he wouldn't be there, and that has different legal implications. Yeah.
I remember a while ago, there's kind of like a hype about certain policies about like banning Sharia law and all of these things. Was that really happening, or is that still happening?
So yeah, it definitely was happening. It's still happening. So from 2010 to through the end of 2013, there were almost 80 anti-Muslim bills introduced in about 30 states across the country. One of the first ones was in Oklahoma. They placed on the ballot a constitutional amendment that would ban state courts from considering Sharia law. And they defined Sharia law as the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. And that sounds bonkers, right? That's like banning alligators from the moon, right? But actually, religion does come into play in courts often. So let's say I have a will, and I say, I want my property, when I die, to be divided in accordance with Sahih Bukhari, verse 10, volume 3, some specific hadith. And there are hadiths that say, for instance, no more than 1/3 of your inheritance can go to charity. So whoever gets your inheritance, they can't give a third, they can't give a half of it to charity because you've placed this limitation on it. And for courts, a court doesn't care if you get that provision from the Quran, from a hadith, from the Bible, or from a coloring book. It doesn't matter to the court so long as they know where to look, and when they look at the text, it's really clear what it means. But under this law, it would forbid the judge. It's got Sharia all over it. I can't look at it. I can't even open the book. And so we sued about that, and we sued just a couple days after 700,000 Oklahomans voted to approve this discriminatory constitutional amendment. So it would actually, Sharia law would have been mentioned in Oklahoma's constitution. And then we sued, it would pass on Tuesday, 700 to 300,000 in favor. We sued on Thursday. There was a hearing on Monday, so 6 days later, and the judge, I don't think you can do this. And she set aside the constitutional amendment. We actually, just over the summer, we got what's called a preliminary injunction, which means the judge is going to stop it from going into effect while the case is pending. And then the case pended, I guess, and then it's finished, and then we won completely because you can't discriminate against Muslims or anybody else. God bless America. But it slowed down, right? So, we're in mid-February, and there's only been a few anti-Muslim bills that have been introduced, like 5 or 6, which sounds terrible, but they're very low profile. They don't even mention Islam anymore. They've learned, I think, from the Oklahoma experience that obviously you have to be a little bit sneakier about your discrimination. And so they're trying to be facially neutral, but still target Muslims, and they're struggling with that. Yeah.
Would you advise laws to have some kind of poster right in the front door that says no recording devices allowed, or no videotaping, audio recording, or something like that?
I mean, so you can at a mosque's discretion, they can have that, but sometimes those types of notifications don't actually amount to like a restriction on recording sometimes. But yeah, no, that's if that's what the mosque wants, and I think many mosques in the area don't allow someone to walk in with a video camera and record the khutbah, which I think is probably for the best. Yeah. All right. So everybody probably got to get home before the snow starts. But thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for having us.